Welcome, friends, to the right side up, otherwise known to some people as the upside down, but really it's the right side up.
Come on.
Yeah. And we have a special James is on his way to my normal co-host, James Scholl, for those of you listening, is on his way to England for a second celebration of his wedding. He just got married, which is pretty exciting. Yeah. And we have a special guest, Hakeem Bradley, is in the house.
What's up,
And
fam?
yeah. And if you don't know this already, if you're listening or watching this, and you don't know I'm a fan of Hakeem, you don't know much. If you follow me at all on social medias, you know, like he's a regular. I share all of his stuff because I love it. You're constantly like tricking me on quizzes, biblical quizzes every Tuesday, is it, or Monday?
Yeah, every Tuesday.
I'm like,
Every
I'm pretty
Tuesday.
sure I know this answer. Then it's like, surprise.
Yes.
And I just love, so Hakeem, you're a biblical researcher, scholar, teacher, writer. You share all kinds of things that are really fun to follow on Instagram if the listeners haven't found you yet.
Thank you.
And we've been in this series on powers and principalities that I reached out to you because I think one of the things that I consistently learn from you is not just like specifics of a story, but like kind of the themes, the larger, the micro, like how the micro fits into the macro narrative of scripture. And I guess I kind of wondered a little bit about what your thoughts what your thoughts on this are.
I'm with you.
And yeah, and maybe some of the ways we get, you know, stuck and maybe like our vision of scripture gets a little bit maligned by powers and principalities, even as we read the scripture and explore a little bit of your story and how you got here and stuff. So,
Yeah.
just want to chat. Yeah,
Oh, no big deals, right? Like just a couple small things. No big
that's right.
deal. Yeah. Yeah. Would you like me to start off with my story, how I came to this point?
Yeah. Tell us a little bit
Yeah.
about how you got here.
Yeah. So I'm originally from Philadelphia, and I grew up in a religious movement called the 5% Nation, which is an offshoot of the Nation of Islam. Christianity was something that I actually had opposition to, or I was trained to have opposition to. And I was in Philadelphia until I was in the 8th grade. Then I moved to Portland, which is completely different space than what I grew up in for a variety of reasons. But when I got there, after about a few years or so, I met this dude named Phil. Phil is a man from a completely different background than myself, like white guy from the suburbs, 2-parent household, middle class, you name it. And I am not that. I'm actually the very opposite, right? Like from single parent household, low economic, social economic status, a black dude, yada, 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 from urban spaces. And so we connected at a soccer game and he wouldn't leave me alone. I thought he was weird at first. So I'm like, all right, like, what's up, man? And God used Phil to change my life, Danielle. Like, this is before I even said yes to Jesus. I saw every sector of his life: marriage, family, friends, work, hobbies. I was involved in it all just because he said, come join me in my life. And so that's how I said, okay, if this is what following Jesus is like, then count me in. Like, tell me what do I got to do. And so he gave me my first Bible, which is in my office to this day. And sometimes I look in the margins and I just go like, Will, what were you talking about, Hakeem? You were learning and I'm still learning, but like, I look back and go, wow. But that Bible is what helped me begin a journey of loving the scriptures. And so I started on page 1 and tried to read all the way through. Got to college. I was a junior at that time. And so I got to college and I just stuck with it. So I went into pastoral ministry, and then about, I don't even know how many years. It was about 2020, 2021, where I was like, I think there's something else that I could do full time. And it was biblical scholarship. And so my friend Tim Mackey offered me a job at Bible Project, and it was on and popping. And so here we are, four years later. I just stepped off staff and started my own things, but just being a Bible nerd. So that's the short version of how I got here.
Okay, I have 100 questions and I'll
Oh
just
yeah,
pick like 3 out of your story.
go
So
for it.
one, it struck me that like was there a big difference between studying the scriptures of the Bible as opposed to what you had been taught to study the scriptures of the Islam The Quran?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So there were, how do I say this? There were additional pieces of literature that we were instructed to read by like the Prophet Elijah Muhammad or the founder of the 5% Nation movement. He had some thoughts in this. Yeah, the Bible was a tool for oppression. That's what we were taught. And it's used by, majority culture in the States to oppress people that look like me and others. And so that's the framework. And it's like, okay, anytime you read the Bible, always read it with a grain of salt because you know it's been corrupted. You know it hasn't been faithfully preserved like the Quran is. And then, when I got into biblical scholarship spaces, I go, oh, this is not what I was taught. Okay. There is actually a trail of preservation that I can actually go recollect. There is these texts have been used to oppress people. They have been used to do so, but that doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily mean that the texts themselves are oppressive, so to speak. And so, yeah, there's a huge difference. Just to give a somewhat short answer to your question.
Yeah, I remember,
Yeah.
some Muslim friends of mine are, like, always a little bit aghast at how I mark my Bible,
Mm,
or even, like,
yeah.
try to paraphrase it or something. They're just like
Sure. They're like, why are you doing that? Yes.
yeah,
Right.
like, 'cause there's, like, a reverence for the actual, words and book
Yeah.
instead of, like, a deep invitation into the, like, themes and concepts, and, so that's an interesting thing to me and maybe a clue as to how, a biblical text gets kind of religified
Yeah. Yeah.
and then becomes a tool of oppression. Because I would say the same, of any religious text, including the Quran, is used as a tool of oppression by
Yeah.
majority culture. Just depends on what your culture is.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
Oh, yeah.
And then the second question I had for you was, did you got to biblical scholarship kind of like thinking, like, did you think pastoral ministry was like the only way? And then you were like, wait a minute, maybe I don't have pastoral gifts. So that was interesting to me too, is like, was that your entry in because you thought, oh, this is what ministry is? And then you're like, oh, there's this whole other thing I could do.
That's exactly what it was because I got into it and I was like, man, I should be a youth pastor. Those are the folks that really like helped me get started. Okay, so I think that's the route. So then I jumped into youth ministry and I'm like, man, I like being around teenagers and I developed some dope relationships. But I was like 21, then I stopped when I was 25, but I just was like, man, I am not built for this. And then it was, okay, let me try to pastor adults. So then it was young adults and then teaching on Sundays and this that, and the third beyond. And I just was like, I'm just not gifted at shepherding people through the things that they actually need to be shepherded through. I can be a good friend to you in a season of life where you are battling with X, Y, and Z, but to pastor you through that season, that's not my gifting. And it was, okay, I want to teach people Bible. I want to learn about Bible. The pulpit and or Bible classes in a church seems to be the only way that I can do that. And it just was like,
Right.
nah, bro. It's a
Yeah.
lot more that can be done. And so when I got exposed to other things outside of the church in a vocational sense, I was like, oh, it's on and popping. Yeah, get me
Yeah.
out of
That's
here.
so cool.
Put
Yeah. That's
somebody in
great.
here who actually has the gifting to pastor people. Let me get
Yeah.
out
And
the way.
just even that desire to go deeper and to see things clearer. And like, just that must be really frustrating to be a youth pastor and be like, we need to go deeper. And like youth
Yeah,
ministry is like a lot of like entrance. I could just be like exhausting.
yeah. Oh
So
yeah,
you worked with the Bible Project as on staff with them as a researcher for a lot of the content that they produce, which I
yeah,
love.
yeah.
And so that explains why I loved it so much because you were like behind it. Who knew? I didn't know. I was like, how are these guys from
Hey,
Portland creating these like and I'm like, it was Hakeem.
yeah.
So I get it now. I get it now.
Yeah, oh, yeah, I had a small part in a few things. It was awesome.
That's good. And then you got to study a little bit more. You're still studying. What are you doing now? Like what are the new creative things that you're up to now?
Yeah, so one of the biggest things is I'm trying to finish my dissertation slash thesis, depending upon one's vocabulary in the world, for my PhD. And so my study is the influence of Genesis 1 through 11 in the Epistle of James. And that's partly because I drank the Kool-Aid of what we talk about at Bible Project all the time, how everything goes back to Genesis. And then I'm like, no, literally, it does though. So that's one thing. And another thing is I just started a new venture called Sacred Patterns. And my goal is to help develop resources for families to help kids grow in biblical literacy by reading the scriptures as literature. and it's sacred literature, but it is literature. So how do we help them develop tools early on and recognize patterns and themes without beating them over the head about certain things that they need to quote unquote believe off the gate? I'm like, yeah, but the doctrine is important. Yes. But also, what are the tools that we can equip them with for them to discover, even in their little communities, in a kids' ministry, or around the table with their family, or at the park with their friends, just reflecting on these texts? How do we teach them how to read them? So that's what I'm trying to get on right now. That's the biggest thing. So
That's
please,
awesome.
please pray for me.
Sacred
I think,
patterns.
yeah, think about how do I want to help my kids
Yeah.
encounter the scriptures, because yeah, I want to teach them there's a Father, Son, Spirit, and like we are an outpouring of love. We are the result of an outpouring of love of this eternal community. Okay, dope. That's great. And they need to know that. But also these texts that are testifying about this, about the Godhead is important. So how do I equip them at 5 and 2 years old just to recognize stories and how these stories are ultimately communicating love from this God that has created them. So that's just that's the hope, you know.
I love that on multiple levels, but one of the things that really strikes me is like, how do we equip people really to read the Bible as a discovery
Yeah.
text, for revelation, which is what
Yeah.
it's for. So
Yes.
even this, we get, and I feel like this will bring us full circle back to this like principality and power kind of idea is that there
Mhm.
is, in the New Testament, the idea that we're not fighting against flesh and blood, but we're fighting against principalities and powers and dominions and ideology. So all of that is around like power, ideology, concepts, systems, structures, theologies even that set themselves up
100%.
as sovereign instead of Jesus, right?
Yeah.
And so I was thinking about how how the Bible becomes part of a power and principality that oppresses people
Hmm.
instead of as the liberation, because it literally is a liberation text from its origin. I mean, it's from a oppressed people group. And
From
then when
multiple
it's
eras. Yes.
right, right. So it's like so bizarre that then like people with like the empire takes it and then uses it against marginalized people group. But what are your thoughts around that? And then what are some of your best tips or
Yeah.
strategies that you use to help?
Yeah, I mean, off the gate, like the biblical story talks about, it starts by talking about this God who creates humans as those who have dominion on the land. And it's like parallel with the rulers above in the skies. And I think the rulers above are, the sun, moon, and stars, which will then later on get symbolized to talk about the host of heaven, like the
Mhm.
spiritual beings in the heavenly realm. And there's this mirrored reality. And I think from the get, though, we are told that we are rulers and we are created as those with power and authority. But as the biblical story goes on, there's this twisted partnership between rebellious spiritual beings and humans, whether we know it or not, where we have partnered together to create chaos in the world. And that's what we see in a Genesis 6 right before the flood. It's what we see in a Tower of Babel episode where the humans are like, yeah, we are going to ascend to the heavenly realm, so to speak, but then Deuteronomy has a later reflection on this. Deuteronomy 32, which talks about when God scatters the humans, he appoints these different people groups to under the authority of different spiritual beings, so to speak, right? Who are all supposed to be leading back to the creator God. This making sense so far? Sorry, I get into a
It's
whole,
deep and beautiful. Yeah, keep
it,
going though.
but it's like, okay, so now you're telling me geographically there are spiritual beings who have power and authority over particular lands and regions. And it's like, yeah, but isn't that what humans were supposed to have? And it's like, yeah. So then what happens throughout the story is all of these rise of kingdoms and empires that end up having these spiritual elements behind the scenes, like the worship of other gods and this, that, and the third. And it develops into some pretty horrific practices that take place. But what is one of the catastrophic things that happens is the oppression of the poor, the oppression of the widows, the oppression of those on the margins in any given society when there's this twisted partnership between humans and spiritual beings that are in rebellion to the God of Genesis 1 and what he intended. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
off the jump, there is a notion of there is a kingdom But there is also an alternative kingdom that comes along that is in rebellion to the true kingdom. And the question is, what kingdom will we align with? And it's the same thing, I think, for spiritual beings. Who will they align with? So that's just some preliminary thoughts, but tell me what you think off that.
I have a gazillion questions mostly about Genesis since this is your, and I love that that's where it starts, right? Like I love that the twisting and the the heavenlies, the powers that are like in another dimension
Mm.
might be a way of saying it.
Yeah.
And our, power and authority that was given to us. But so there's a couple things, I guess. One is
Mhm.
like there's something okay. I'm just going to ask you about the
Mhm.
creation of humans in Genesis. So one of the things that drives me crazy is just patriarchy in general,
Sure. Yeah.
which I think is a twisting of the entire narrative of equity in the scriptures. So I think
Yeah.
Genesis text for me is one of those ones where it's like, in his image, God made them male and female, he made them. So
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
idea of like men and women from the beginning, this origin plan of God being made in God's image, and somehow that being taken as like a hierarchical read. So even when I think this is one of the most liberating texts in the world, Genesis. And so I get like so
Yeah.
excited about it because of course only certain people would have been made in God's image, like Pharaoh specifically, I would imagine as
Yeah.
Genesis is being written.
Yeah.
But anyway, so what's your reading of that origin story? Is
Yeah.
equity in there? Is that what it's meant to do?
Yeah. It's 100% the way I read it. Male and female are both images of God, and together we are called to be co-rulers with the Creator on the land. Some people will go like, "Well, the Eden story has a different portrait of this whole thing," and I go, "All right, what do you mean by that?" Yeah, you have the human who's created first, and then the human is split into two, and then you have the man and then the woman, and then together they are one flesh. But that's just also another way of, or it's another way
Telling
of
the
looking
same
at
story.
telling the same story of what Genesis 1 was getting at, where God creates, let us create human, let us create Adam, and then male and female, they are the image together. So it's two ways of communicating the same idea. It's equity through and through. However, when there's a rebellion that takes place in the Eden story, then things start to twist up. And so when God speaks to the woman and he says, "Yeah, your husband will rule over you, or your desire will be for your husband and he will rule over you." This is this is not ideal.
Yeah,
This is not
that's a
ideal
twisting.
at all. And it's the same thing that God warns later on with their son Cain, and he says, "Yo, sin is knocking at the door, and its desire is for you, but you must rule over it." So, in a way, like there's this inversion of what just happened in Genesis 3, but it's also a continuation. So you're like, regardless of what it is, it's not the ideal state.
Mhm.
The Eden template is the ideal state of male and female ruling together in the land to create flourishing in the world. And without ladies, men create horrible worlds. This is what we see. This is what we see, right? So if there's not a counterbalance, if and who knows? I don't know what the world would look like if women were the ones who were establishing the X, Y, and Z, and then men were now being subjugated. Who know? I don't know what that world is like because that's not the world that I live in.
Yeah.
But what I do see is what takes place when it's inequitable. It leads to chaos. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I 100% I agree with you. And so that's why I think that the twisting and then sort of the justification of like hierarchical lorded over sort of stuff, which is actually the same twisting that just keeps happening over and over again. You're like, what on earth?
Over and
How is this
over.
happening? Oh,
Yeah.
do you see? I also have been interested in this, like the Genesis poem and the Babylonian myth being
Mm,
very similar with like Genesis twisting it at the end in a right way. Is
yeah.
that is
Yeah.
that something that
Yeah.
you've
Yeah. I mean,
tell us about that, Hakeem?
I think this might get me in trouble. I think there are so many. I'll just say this: the Israelites are riding in the same cultural waters as those around them. Babylonians, other Mesopotamians, the Egyptians, Assyrian, like these are all folks who are in the same cultural waters. So they're
Yes.
going to have similar ways of communicating, similar ideas, similar worldviews with some tweaks. And that's what we see in the chapters of Genesis, where uh yeah, the Israelites have a interesting way of how they are communicating about men and women that is distinct from these other ancient Near Eastern groups who are, it's all about patriarchy, right?
Well, and even
But
humanity, like the humanity itself, right?
yeah,
As opposed to like classism or caste systems or, we serve the God, whoever the God is that we say, whether it's Caesar or Pharaoh or, you know,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, or even
interesting.
that many of these other creation stories in other ancient Near Eastern cultures is that humans are the product, or they were only created to appease the gods. And if they do something wrong, they're gonna piss them off, and it's gonna lead to a bunch of bad stuff. But the Israelites are articulated, no, 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 no. Humans were created because it was out of love, and God said, no, y'all are my image, all of y'all, not just the ones in power, all of y'all, which is a fundamental way of looking at humanity that is different from the
Yeah.
rest. So that's just
Yeah.
one among many that I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of similarities, but then there's some subtle ways that the Israelites are digging at these other cultures.
Yeah.
And
I think it's like,
yeah,
I feel like, I don't know why that would get you in trouble because I feel like that's the peak of good communication.
yeah, I think it would get me in
Right?
trouble
Like,
because
it's like yeah, it's like, that's just good communication. It's like taking something that seems familiar. This is
yeah,
like Jesus does this all the time in the parables, and then, like, surprise, God's
yeah,
different from this, right? So it's
yeah,
like, and I feel like you if you don't get it, like, if you don't get that that's actually a means by which you communicate truth, and it's
yeah,
like this drop the mic moment. So people are all like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." It's the same with the flood, right? Everybody has that flood
yes,
story, and
yes,
everybody's like, "Yeah, yeah," everybody dies, and then it's like, "Oh, no. Actually, there's a different ending in this one."
yes, yes. And I think at least in some spaces it can be, did the Israelites copy all these other places? And it's like, all right, they plagiarizing X, Y, Z. I'm going, no, they're just speaking as ancient Near Eastern people spoke.
Right.
That's just what it was. It's the
Yeah.
same way us in the States will have similar cultural ways of speaking as those of you from the North. And then it's like, oh, why? Because we swim in similar cultural waters, even though we do have some differences between Canada and the States. So in the same way, why would it be different between the Israelites and the Babylonians, for example, or the
Right.
Israelites and the Egyptians? It's similar cultural waters, but they are they're very subtle in what they do. They say God just spoke and creation came to be versus the gods ripping each other apart or reproducing with each other to bring forth this world that we live in. They just go,
Or
no.
fighting, competing,
Yeah.
like,
It's just like,
bragging.
exactly. They're like, no, all God did was speak and things came to be. That's how powerful our God is. And you're like, okay, I see what you're doing. You're doing some digs there. So yeah,
That's cool.
yeah, you know,
What has been the most mind-blowing, like, so a thesis is a lot because maybe this is the last thing you wanna talk about right now because sometimes you get down that hole, you're just like, "Make it stop." But,
sure.
what is some of the most mind-blowing, you
Yeah.
know, stuff that you've discovered where you're just like, "This is wild."
Yeah, I am struck by how influential the early chapters of Genesis is throughout the scriptures and in James. For example, speaking of power dynamics, in chapter 5, he talks about how the rich are oppressing the poor. And he says, the wages of the workers are crying out against you. You have murdered their innocent one. And I'm like, how is that not Cain and Abel language? Literally, the idea about crying out is the wages of the poor workers are crying out against the rich who they are
"Am
working
I my
for.
brother's keeper?"
Come
The
on.
blood of
Like,
your brother cries out from the ground.
that's
Right.
exactly what it is. And then
Wow.
James goes, you've murdered the innocent one. I'm like, come on. It's in the text. Or you even look in the middle of his letter. This is James 3. He says, he talks about the tongue and how it can't be tamed. And he's like, hey, we've tamed the beast. We've tamed the reptiles, the fish, the birds. I'm like, okay, so you have the creatures of creation, but we cannot tame the tongue. It's like a fire, yada, yada. And then he goes on to say, out of the same mouth, we bless God, but we curse humans and who are made in God's likeness. And you're just like, come on. His foundation for what he's articulating is Genesis 1 through and through. The rationale for how he's encouraging his audience to speak with with wisdom, but also to speak wisely to another person. It's because he believes that Genesis 1 is the precedent for how we treat one another. And then right after that, he talks about the wisdom from above versus the wisdom from below. And you're like, oh my
Right.
God, the heavenly wisdom, which is accessible to us. That's literally what he's trying to get at. You have the the wisdom of God is accessible to all of us. And if we choose not to live into that wisdom or to seek out that wisdom, what are we going to do? We're going to create more chaos in the realm that we have authority and power in. We're going to partner with the demonic, so to speak, which is what I think he's getting
From the
at the
wisdom
end.
from below. We're going to
The
partner with like
wisdom.
the knowledge from below or whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and what does the knowledge of below do? It just creates more agents of chaos. So that's we can. There's two lines that I think the Genesis narratives set up. Right? It's the line of the woman and it's the line of the snake. This is not about humans having a literal fear of baby snakes. Right? The offspring of the. Trust me, I don't like snakes neither. But that this is not what that's getting at. It's about whose allegiance will you have? Who are you going to align yourself with? And anybody can become an offspring of the snake. You don't have to stay there, but anybody can. Cain is an example. He is born of the woman. So everybody's asking, who's the seed of the woman that God was talking about in Genesis 3 that's going to crush the serpent's head? Is it her baby? Is it Cain? And then you see how he behaves. He allows himself to be ruled over by this crouching sin figure, right? So to speak. And he follows in the same pattern as his parents. And what is the result? He ends up murdering his brother. And then as a result, he ends up becoming aligned with the line of the snake. And so you're like, oh, but then
So he's a
Abel,
child of the snake.
he's a child of the snake at that moment. And you're just like, because what is the snake's agenda? As Jesus would articulate, it's to kill, steal, and destroy. He's a liar and a murderer from the beginning. This is what he says, what, in John 8 or something like that?
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, okay.
Hmm.
So this is prevalent for us today as well. Whose line will we, join in? Will we be a part of the line of the woman or the line of the snake? And the snake has authority out here. He's the prince of the power of the air. However, Christ has come as a new Moses. It's like he walked into Pharaoh's palace, so to speak. And he's like, hey, hey, it's time for all my people to get up out of here. But he's not asking Pharaoh, quote unquote. He's not asking the snake to let his people go. He's saying, no, I'm crushing you. Everybody's going to get free out here. Now, y'all can choose to leave with me, or you can stay here in this crumbled kingdom. So,
Well, also, what
yeah.
is that little thing that happens where the snake, like side story in the snake is swallowing the other snake? That's like one of my
Yeah.
favorite. I'm like, why
Yeah.
don't people talk about this more? It's very
Yeah.
cool
Yes.
because this is all unfolding and it's like everybody's like, this is ridiculous. Pharaoh has all the power. Like, this is never going to work. These guys can even
Yeah.
like do magic tricks to match the signs. And then
Yeah.
meanwhile, like while they're having this
Snake
conversation,
is just swallowing them. Yeah.
Moses's staff snake swallows the.
Yes. Yes.
That's cool.
Indeed. These are just all the analogies. So I'm not trying to make everything one for one too much, but
Yeah, yeah,
the snake is representative of a rebellious figure in the
yeah.
scriptures that is never named. And Satan is not a name, it's a title. Lucifer is not a name, that's a title in
That's
Latin,
right.
right? Son of what is it? Son of the
The
morning or
light,
morning
the
light of the morning
morning
star or
star
something like
light.
that.
Yeah.
But it's Latin, it's a title. The devil is not a name. The accuser, the slanderer, whatever, it's always a title because this figure or whatever this being is doesn't deserve to be named. As a matter of fact, not to
Kind
have
of
a
like
name.
Pharaoh.
Yeah, kind of like
We don't
Pharaoh. It's
name
a
him
subtle
either.
dig. Yeah, it's a very. Come on, Danielle, you preaching? It's a subtle
Why would we
dig.
name a tyrant? He's just a
Why would?
tyrant like every other tyrant. Why would you name a devil?
Yeah,
He's just a devil like any other. Yeah.
yeah.
Interesting.
Why would you give that dignity, so to
So
speak?
the seed of the woman then is anyone that partners with God in the co-creating of the original vision, right? So, and then in Romans, when it talks about how the body of Christ will crush Satan underneath their feet, this is
Mhm,
always as
mhm,
it doesn't say Jesus crushed Satan. It says that
mhm,
the church will crush Satan.
mhm.
So I'm always so when people say like the seed of the woman is Jesus, I'm always like, yes, but also
We can join in with him.
we
Yeah,
do the crushing, right? Like the body of Christ, which is the people of God, do the crushing. you know?
Yeah, it's like yeah, the head crusher of the snake is a motif that develops, right? Because
Mm.
even David later on, he'll go to battle with Goliath, who is depicted as a shining snake. Like his armor in Hebrew is the word nechoshet, which means bronze, which is from the root nachash, which means snake or serpent.
Ah,
And you're like, oh, and what does he do? He defeats him by, slinging that stone. Goliath
hitting his
falls
head,
out, and then he cuts his
cuts
head
his head
off.
off.
And you're like, and this is after he just got anointed. And so you're like,
Wait a
so
minute.
he's an anointed one who
Right,
is literally defeating the shining, scary man,
right,
snake man giant, right? And he is a type that then Jesus will later come into, but we as the body are joining in him in what he's doing. So by choosing to be hospitable, by choosing not to retaliate, by choosing to speak up when others are being harmed by those in power, by choosing to live generously. Those are acts that are actively crushing the snake. Those are
right.
acts that are actively battling against the kingdom of darkness because I'm not going, like we said at the beginning, my enemy is never another human being. There is a spiritual power, like spiritual realm behind what is happening or overlapping with what is happening that I'm really after. What is oppressing my brother or sister to cause them to live in this way? Or what can potentially be causing me to live in this way as I'm choosing to partner with it, so to speak, whether I do so willingly or unknowingly or what have you. So me choosing to live generously, to live hospitably and this, that, and the third those are my weapons against the kingdom of darkness. That's how we defeat him. You tell the truth. You
Right,
don't tell a lie. A lie is a weapon of the kingdom of darkness.
right,
It is what enslaves. It is what oppresses. It is what harms. But if I say, no, 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 you are an image of God and you are created to rule with the greatest image of God, which is Jesus, right? You
right.
are now, he is saying, come rule with me in new creation starting now.
Hmm.
Why would I not treat you as if why would I not treat you like a true image, a co-heir? Why would I not do that? How else do I expect you to come to see yourself for who you really are? Before the foundations of the world, there was love for you. Before the foundations, we're talking before, as my friend Adam would say, before the trauma, before the
Right,
heartaches, before the
right,
pains, before the systems, before all of the things that we have seen throughout human history that are horrific. God said, yeah, I had love. My love was evident for you. So that's real kingdom power right there. Love. That's it.
right. And that's I feel like Jesus reveals the true what it means to rule, like
Yes.
from wisdom from above. Like this is
Yes.
what the original plan was to bring healing and mutual flourishing and like good news and liberation. And this was
Yes.
always what it meant to rule in the image of God. And then
Yes.
we just distorted the image of God, right? Which is part of
Yeah.
that. So my friend Bob Ekblad, he said he wrote the book Reading the Bible with the Damned. He's a theologian. You guys would get on well. You would love
Come
him.
on.
But he's the one that floated this by me the first time when we were talking about Genesis. And he said he believes that the original sin is the passive participation in the presence of predatory evil.
By Adam. Yeah.
And when you were just talking about that, where it's not just about like not doing something,
Mhm.
like, and I think this is this passivity that we've like Christians have sort of, especially Western Christians have sort of been like, good Christians are like nice,
Mm.
which
Mm.
is translated as they don't do
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah.
And I think when he said like, oh, that's the original sin, even of like, because Adam was given and Eve were given this
Mm.
invitation to rule, right? Which
Mm.
would be to actually stand up against predatory evil when it comes knocking.
Yeah.
And they don't. And so then that's that. Now there's this choice so that every time, and that's why Jesus even is like, we take the kingdom by force. Like we take the authority that's been given to us and we use it in a way that reflects
Mm.
the goodness of God and God's plan for the world and
Mm.
humanity.
I
Yeah.
love that. I love that. Cause you know what I think, Daniel, to be honest? I think the enemy's like, oh, they think this is just about being nice.
Mhm.
I'm finna eat. Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, let them keep thinking that's what this is about. Let them
Right.
keep thinking that this is about not cussing. Okay. Like
Right.
let them think this is all right, yeah, while I'm out here destroying people by enslaving them to the sex industry and the horrors of that, while I'm out here trying to create systems that disenfranchise people over and over and over again, while I'm out here trying to influence systems to do X, Y, and Z. Yeah, let them keep thinking that this is about being nice. Yeah, I'm gonna eat. And it's like we just need to pray that God would peel back any form of deception that we've believed into. Say, yo, God, rip the wool that is over our eyes if we think this is just about the simple things of A, B, and C when it's really about X, Y, and Z. You know, so I watched this documentary once and there was a woman on there. She was from Iran, I believe, and she said she was married to an American man. She said, I need to go back to Iran because I'm getting sleepy here. There's a satanic lullaby over the States, and I'm getting
Yep.
sleepy.
Yep.
The satanic lullaby? Oh, oh,
Mhm.
we are sleeping. Because if you go to other places, particularly in the East or the global South, and I'm
Mhm.
not just trying to bash on the West, but there are things out here that people are doing really well. But if you go to the global East and South, there are elements of the overlap between the spiritual and physical realm that you're like, what? I
Mhm.
had no idea that this existed. And I really do think the enemy's like, okay, yeah, people over here think it's sweet. Oh,
Yeah, the picture I had when you were talking even is that Jungle Book, when the snake is like lulling the guy to sleep so that he can squeeze the life out of him. I think that's 100% part of the trouble is that we're not awake. But I also think part of the trouble is the reason we're not awake is because I think one of the great awakening agents is the scriptures.
mm-hmm.
The stories are meant to be awakening. Like they're alarming, they're jarring even sometimes. Like I'm just like, have you guys read this? Like this is crazy.
Yeah,
But that very thing has been used as a tool to lull us to sleep, right? So
absolutely.
and you just
Absolutely.
sort of
Just
go
read your
like,
Bible, say in your devotionals, and you'd be good.
yeah, and read your Bible in such a way that it's like just personal truth for you. Everything's hyper individualized. This isn't like a narrative of the people.
Yeah.
This is like about, your own health, happiness, prosperity instead of a radical invitation to live differently and an invitation to the cost of that. Like, and I just think, man, I think, how did we get here? Like, I was talking to I think it was the Canadian Bible Society or Gideon's or somebody like that, and they were trying to like rebrand. And I was saying, and they were like, because they can't get into schools the way they could in Canada, particularly. They're like, yeah, no, that's not a thing.
Yeah.
And so they're kind of trying to do it different, which is great. And I was like, why don't you just publish like the Bible that was forbidden for slaves to read? And the
Mm,
guy's like, what?
mm,
Well, first he didn't know. I was like, you should look this up, man, because like
yeah,
the
keep it
Christians in
real.
America produced a Bible and took out all of the texts that might actually speak to the enslaved people of liberation, which is like the whole Bible. Like it's like so much of this. There's no Exodus in that Bible. There's no
Mm,
James in that Bible. There's no.
yeah,
So and so I was like, why don't you just publish the forbidden, like the forbidden texts.
that's
Like
good.
that'd be fun, right? Like I mean, that would be a way of like why are this thing if this thing is actually in support of things like slavery or oppression or excessive capitalism or whatever,
Mm,
wealth and power and kings and then why are you editing it?
yes. Why are you snatching things out that you're
Right.
afraid will cause folks to rise up and say, hold on, no, 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 no. Y'all have been distorting this thing
Right.
in ways that is unimaginable. Because you're just like, how did y'all get to this point? Frederick Douglass will call it out all the time. He's like, there's a
Right.
Christianity of Christ and a Christianity of this land. And y'all are bugging out because this is not and so
But I love that. I love the idea of even there is a Christianity of the woman or a Christianity of the snake.
you better preach. Come
Like,
on, Doc.
oh, you better know I'm gonna preach. This is like excellent
Come on.
material. But like what are you born of, really? And I wonder if that's even that like I'm born from above, right? Like you must be born
Mhm.
from above. Is this like you gotta be born from the woman and take
Yeah.
the authority that's been given to you to rule in the way that reflects God,
Yeah.
you know?
It's like, so God gave humans dominion on the
Mhm,
land, right?
mhm.
Take two. That's take one. Take two is this whole Eden story, right? And this rebellious figure is an animal in the story, so to speak.
Yeah,
And humans are supposed to be ruling over the animals, but the
right.
animal ends up, but we know it's more than that. But it's an animal that ends up ruling over the humans. And you're like, did humans forfeit the authority that God established for humanity to this being? And now this being's able to do X, Y, and Z in this realm that we have authority and power over. And
Is
it's
that
like,
why
yeah,
it's do you think that's why it's a snake? Because the snake is part of the created order that the like, do you think it's
yeah,
about that they allowed
yeah,
and then why is it talking? Those are like some of
yeah,
the that's some of the
yeah,
principles of good hermeneutics, is it? Of like, what
yeah,
doesn't make sense, pay attention to that. Don't like just ignore it.
yeah. Yes. And snakes were, they're big within ancient Near Eastern folklore, in religious ideologies. So it's not coincidental that it's a snake, but it's also interesting that it's more than a snake. And the question is, well, where did it come from? And it's like, well, yeah, it was already there in the garden, it seems like, because if the garden is the overlap of heaven and earth in this moment, the spiritual beings and the beings of this realm are living
Yeah,
together with God, so to speak.
right.
And Isaiah has an interesting vision, right? When he gets called, and what does he see? He sees these seraphim, these fiery snakes that are flying around the throne of God. And as far as we know, other beings, spiritual beings that are around the throne are the cherubim, which this is a whole thing. But you have that, or the what they're called living creatures, or
Yeah.
something like that. They have multiple faces, and they're
We call
like,
them God's pets. Our family calls those God's pets.
I love that, right?
Right.
Like, because they're literally
Yeah.
around the
They're
throne.
something special. Yeah.
So it makes you go, are the seraphim, the fiery snakes, and the cherubim two ways of talking about same category of spiritual beings? Because the Ezekiel poem in Ezekiel 28 will be talking about the king of Tyre while also talking about a spiritual rebel as well. And it says, you were a cherub in the garden of God. And so you're like, was this snake one of the guardians of God's throne that then chose to wild out? And so there's something more to this, but the fact that this being is portrayed as a snake, as an animal, taking these humans and making them subjugated to the snake, then
Yeah.
you have a reversal of the roles that was taking place between humans and animals in the creation order. And so I think that has spiritual implications. And I think that's, you can say the snake has authority over the earthly realm. And Christ has come to say, yeah, no, that don't belong to you. What we talking about? That don't belong to you. It never did. You should have stayed in your place too. So I'm snatching everything back. Give me the keys. Give me the land. I'm taking
So the curse
as in,
also then isn't really on the snake, like the animal snake. It's on the figure
yeah, I don't think
of
on
the
the
snake,
animal person. Yeah,
which
not
would
the,
be whatever title you want to give
yeah,
evil, right? Like the
yeah,
devil or the Satan.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and yeah, I don't think snakes in general are cursed, right? Like pythons and anacondas, I don't think they're cursed. But I do think it's about the entity that the serpent represented. At least that's where my head is at currently on that.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah. It makes so much
Yes.
sense. And it also like it doesn't just make sense from the scriptures, that these realms are the places in a realm where those overlaps happen, but also this usurping, really, this
Yeah.
twisting, this
Yeah.
dynamic of like coming under authority that is actually twisted and wrong and based on lies.
Mm.
And then you see that replicating itself in human history, right? Where it's like,
Yeah.
even when you think like, so, back in the church where the church is like, we'll be like, we'll just Christianize the empire. But then you're like, but that's actually such a twisting of,
Mm.
right? Like, that's not the rule of God. That's not the mutual flourishing. That's like something else that you're doing now and just pretending like it's, did not God say you were going to have dominion, right?
Mm.
But
Mm.
it's like, not that kind, you know?
Yeah, the power that we have access to is, it doesn't need to be coerced. It doesn't need to be massaged. It doesn't need to be syncretized. It is otherworldly. Paul even talks about, what is it, First Corinthians 2? He talks about the wisdom of God that is from the Spirit is accessible right now. We're talking, you're telling me the same wisdom that God was like, the same wisdom that God had to create the cosmos
Mhm,
is accessible to us right now.
mhm,
Yeah, the same wisdom that said best course of action, it seems, is to send the Son into the world to redeem it, to
mhm.
restore it, to reconcile it, to cleanse it, to all the things I could say, adjectives, right? It, that's the best is accessible to me right now. Yes. Okay, you're telling me the same wisdom
Right.
that said male and female together are
Mhm,
my image
mhm,
is accessible to me right now. That's otherworldly. What are we
mhm.
talking about? I don't need the wisdom of below.
Well, and
I
not
want
only
that.
is it otherworldly and wisdom from above, but it also will look like foolishness to
Yes.
those who are living below. And
Yes.
that's, I think that's part of the same problem that keeps repeating too, even from Genesis, is we want to believe and look good to
Mm,
the world below, right? Like we
mm,
want to kind of like let our achievements be here instead of actually the wisdom from
yeah.
above. So that
Yeah.
maybe eventually once people get it, we'll go, oh wow, that was, like
Mm,
even the life of Jesus, right? Where maybe like as it unfolded, everyone's like, is that guy an idiot? Like,
mm.
and then now we're like, whoa, that guy was like, that was,
Genius.
yeah, that was from
He was
above.
locked in.
Yeah, that was from above. Yeah.
It's like this. Back to what I was saying earlier. It's like choosing not to retaliate against someone who hurts your feelings or says
Mhm.
something disparaging about you or beyond. Choosing not to retaliate. See, is like foolishness in our day and age. They're like, what are you talking about? You need to put that on social media, blast them, expose them so we can cancel them, right? Like
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of things that do need to be exposed. Like hard disclaimer, right? Yes.
Yeah. But it's not
And
retaliation.
but
Right.
it's not
Hmm.
retaliation.
Right.
And me choosing not to retaliate in some things, people going, man, that's dumb. Go get yours. Go get your lick back. And it's just like, nah,
Nah.
that's not where the real power lies. Me choosing to harm somebody in response or
Mhm.
in reactivity to them harming me, that's not where the real power lies. There is
Yeah.
no
The
power
power
in
is
that.
creative. The power is
Yeah.
creative power. Right.
Me choosing to say, you know what, man, I forgive you. And we might not be where we were before, relationship wise, but I do release you from that. That is
Yeah.
a different kind of power. And
Hmm.
that is what true power looks like. It's the,
Right.
I think that's what Jesus is getting at, where he's like, yo, true power looks like weakness in this world.
Hmm.
How many
Yep.
people thought Christ was weak because he didn't spaz out on X, Y, and Z?
Yeah.
And he
Yeah.
said, you know, I'm on a different type time.
Yeah.
I'm on a very different type time. So I want to
Yeah.
be like the rabbi in that way. And that's going to cost a lot. Pride, ego, everything is going to have to die. The invitation is come die so that you can truly access life. I'm like, okay, Rabbi Jesus, you onto something. You know something. You have the wisdom that is of above. Who am I to say, nah, you tripping?
That's so cool. What do you actually do when you're reading your Bible? Like, do you pray before you read?
Sometimes it's
Yeah.
like, all right, you know, let's get it.
Show me. Show me
Yeah,
some.
let's just
What are your
dive
best
in.
tools that you don't have to pay for people to go on
Yeah.
exploration?
Pay attention to repeated words. Pay attention to
You a
thematic parallels.
Blue Letter Bible
Yeah.
fan?
Yeah.
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 That's a good tool. If you guys don't know, Blue Letter Bible's got some really good interlinear stuff and like
And
word
it's free.
searches, and it's free. Yeah.
And it's free. Yes. It's out there. Pay attention because repeated words develop into patterns. And
Hmm.
patterns will help you see common threads throughout the scriptures. So those are that's the biggest thing I tell people. Pay attention to repeated words, thematic parallels, and ask yourself, what is the wisdom of this story? It doesn't necessarily have to mean you have to go do something right after this. But how can it be forming you into the way that you think, the way that you feel, the way that you see other people, the world you live in, your own circumstances, your heart? How does it shape us? Lastly, go slow. There is no rush. There's no reward. Nobody's waiting for you on the other side of this thing going, man, you get a gold star for reading the Bible quickly as you could. No, what you do get a gold star for is allowing the scriptures to tell a story that you begin to participate in and be formed by and shaped by and invite others to participate in that leads to flourishing. That's what we get a gold star for.
That's beautiful.
It's
Hakeem, where
true.
can people follow you and connect with you? What's the best?
Yeah. Best route probably Instagram right now. It's Hakeem Bradley at Hakeem Bradley one. I have a website. I have a TikTok I barely use, but that's
Yeah.
Instagram and my website are probably the main ones. I have a contact
Okay.
email that people can chit chat with once I
Okay. I'll put your
enable that.
website in the show
Sure.
notes and
Sure.
people follow this guy. It's like nonstop. I love what's coming out of you. I love that the but also just I think one of the things I see that you do, even in this conversation, is just like awaken people to the power and discovery of the scriptures. Like there's
Yeah.
more. That's one of the things I love is just like, and I think that's part of the Ephesians prayer, Paul says, like,
Mm,
go ahead and try, like test. How long does this love go? Like, how wide is it? How high is it? How deep is it? Like, go ahead, test it. And I
yeah.
feel like that's if I could have a life statement, I'm like, I'm just testing the love. And I cannot find the end in sight.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
scriptures awaken you to that in so many powerful ways. So thanks for
100%.
helping people with that. I think it's beautiful.
Well, thanks for allowing me to chit chat.
And I can't wait to get some of this stuff you're creating, like for my own kids. They love it too.
I
Yeah, can't
appreciate
wait.
that. Same
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, I'm cheering you on. Okay, thanks.